Welcome to part 2 of going over every single setting in Hitfilm Pro's Chroma Key Effect. So in part 1 we covered these settings that appear when you first open up the effect, and we created a primary key. So this is what we did in the first part, and obviously this key is pretty bad because it's a primary key, so we're going to make it better in this part using matte enhancement. So in this part, part 2, we're going to go over all the settings in the matte tab, so from clip background down to bias. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to be using this image again, just like in the last part, to help explain things. If you forgot, this image represents hue, saturation, and value. So the ring out here is hue, this is saturation, and this is value. Okay, so I'm going to apply the chroma key effect, and I'm going to go into status for these first few settings. So clip foreground and clip background. These settings are pretty similar to gain and balance, so if you remember from the last part, gain controls the range of hues, saturations, and values that will be completely keyed out. So you can see what gain is doing there, and balance controls the range of hues that will be affected by the gain. So it controls like the cutoff there. So clip background and clip foreground, you can think of it as refining gain and balance. So if I change the clip background, you can see it's changing the cutoff of what colors are being made completely transparent, right? And same thing with clip foreground, it changes the cutoff for what colors will be opaque. And the difference between these two in gain and balance is that if you look at gain and you look at balance, you can see that these two cutoffs are moving together, right? So gain and balance affect both of them at the same time. But with clip foreground and clip background, you can change these two cutoffs independently of each other. So it's just refining gain and balance. Okay, next, let's go to clip rollback. So clip rollback, it only has an effect if you use clip foreground. So for example, if I leave clip foreground at 1, then you can see clip rollback doesn't do anything. But if you do use clip foreground, then clip rollback does exactly what it sounds like. It rolls back the areas of the image that were clipped white by the clip foreground. So you can see that if we change this, the outline of the image is preserved, right? So clip rollback doesn't affect the outline, it just makes the edges of the areas that were affected by the clip foreground semi-transparent. So clip rollback is useful if you use clip foreground to make the middle of your matte solid white, but you still want some transparency at the edges. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to go back to my footage and go to matte view. So you can see here that it doesn't look like we need clip background, so I'm just going to go to clip foreground and bring it down about maybe there until this middle of the fan is pretty much white. But if we zoom in on this edge here, you can see that from the source, these frills are supposed to be semi-transparent, right? But since we use the clip foreground, these have basically become completely opaque. But we can fix that with the clip rollback. So we can roll back the effect of the clip foreground a bit so that we restore some of that semi-transparency. And now let's go on to gamma. Okay, so this is the setting we're going to go into the most technical detail about, because unlike these other settings, which are mostly self-explanatory, it's pretty hard to know what gamma does just by its name. But don't worry, I'm going to explain it. So gamma, it represents the fall off of the matte. Okay, it controls the fall off. So to show you this, I'm going to go here, I'm going to just reset this and repick the color. So if we go into the matte view, you can see that from this image, the fall off from white to black or from opaque to transparent is pretty linear, right? Which is what you expect. But if you start to increase the gamma, you can see that fall off is getting pushed towards the transparent edge, right? It's getting sort of tighter over here. And same thing if you decrease the gamma, then it starts getting tighter towards the opaque edge. So gamma controls the fall off. And you can also, if you go into status view, you can see that the gamma only affects the semi-transparent pixels, right? It doesn't affect the cutoffs here and here. So it only affects the gray pixels, so that's why there isn't really much change, except when gamma is really small, some of the pixels get pushed so close to 0 that they basically black out. But for the most part, in general, gamma is only supposed to affect semi-transparent pixels because it's affecting fall off. So that's the intuitive understanding of gamma. It affects fall off. But now let's get technical and see what's actually happening behind the scenes. So as you know, if I switch to matte, in a matte image, every pixel has a value between 0 and 1, right? So 1 represents white or fully opaque, 0 represents pure black or fully transparent, and anything in between is a shade of gray or a value between 0 and 1. So what gamma is doing is it's taking the value of every single pixel and it's raising it to the power of 1 over gamma. So to show you what this means, I graphed the gamma function in Desmos. So here, the y-axis is the output pixel, and the x-axis is the input pixel. So you can see the output pixel is equal to the input pixel raised to the power of 1 over gamma in the range 0 to 1. So in Hitfilm, gamma can be any value between 0.01 and 5, so I made this slider to represent gamma, and you can see with gamma set to the default value of 1, we have a straight line, or a linear fall-off, right? And that's because 1 over 1 is 1, and anything raised to the power of 1 is just itself, so this is a line. But if we start increasing it, then we can see that all the values between 0 and 1 get raised into this curve, right? So that's why when gamma is increased, there's a more gradual fall off towards 1, right? Or towards white. And if we decrease gamma to something below 1, you can see the opposite is happening. All the values between 0 and 1 are getting lowered, so that's why there's a sharper gradient when it goes towards 1. And notice also that the values 0 and 1 stay exactly where they are, right? No matter what the gamma is, these two stay in place. And that's because 0 raised to any power is 0, and 1 raised to any power is always 1. So that's how gamma is able to affect only the semi-transparent pixels and not pixels that have a value of 0 or 1. Okay, so that's the technical explanation of gamma. It's just a very simple math function. Cool. So in practice, gamma is useful for fine-tuning the edges of a matte, especially if you have edges that are supposed to be semi-transparent, such as hair. So in the case of our footage, you can see that we have these holes that are kind of cut out a bit, so we can use the gamma to try to bring some of the detail back. So you can see if we increase the gamma, we sort of recover some of the edges there. Alright, moving on to erode/expand. This one is very self-explanatory. So a negative value shrinks the mask and a positive value grows the mask. So this is usually used if we go to result. This is usually used if you have a green outline around your subject and you want to get rid of it, so you can erode the mask by a few pixels to get rid of that green outline. And now moving on to Despot Foreground and Despot Background. Again, these are pretty self-explanatory. If we go into Map View, so Despot Foreground will just get rid of any holes in your foreground. So if we increase this, you can see that those holes are filled in. So in our case, we don't want to do that because those holes are supposed to be there, but you might use this if, for example, your subject had a green speck that was part of their costume that you didn't want to key out. And Despot Background does the exact same thing, except it fills in the opaque areas in the background and fills them in black. So you might use Despot Background if you have an uneven green screen with a lot of grain, or maybe even if you had really tiny tracking markers that you wanted to remove. And next, Softness. So Softness blurs the matte, or it blurs the alpha. So you can see that there. And if we go into result, you can see the effect of softness is that it softens the edge. It gives it a better transition because the alpha is blurred. So, but also, okay, note that softness is not the same as preblur, okay? So if we go and add a blur and change this to matte, so preblur is blurring your footage, your source footage, before applying any of the settings in the chroma key effect, right? So preblur is blurring before, and this is the result of preblur, but softness is blurring after. So softness is you've already created your matte with all of these settings, and now you want to blur it a bit to get a more transparent edge. So this is softness, and this is preblur. So Preblur smooths out jagged edges, and Softness makes the edges more transparent for a smoother transition. Okay, so let's delete that and go on to the last setting of this part, bias. So bias literally just means white balance. So if I add in a white balance effect, alright, so Hitfilm just crashed, but we're back, and I think we were on bias. So bias is the same as white balance. So if we add in a white balance effect here, then I'm going to move this to the top and just turn this off really quickly. So white balance, say if I choose this as my white, then if you do that for bias, then it just means that the chroma key effect is going to key this color corrected image instead of your original. So instead of the original image here, it's going to key this image. So let's delete that, turn this back on. So to use this, I can go into the source, again, maybe select this as my white, and then go into result. Use that color corrected image to key. So that's it. That's the last setting of this part. I know technically these settings are also under the mat, but I'm going to go over them in a later part because they don't affect the mat at all. I'm not really sure why they're listed under here. Actually, you can even see this because if you go into the mat view, they disappear. So yeah, I don't know why they're listed under there, but I'm going to go over them in a later part. They're more for color correction, so I'm probably going to go over them in the video about color correction. But yeah, so if we scroll through this footage, you can see that it's a lot better, right, than it was before. It's still not perfect because I went through these pretty fast. You know, I didn't really stop to adjust because I don't want to make this tutorial too long. But if you're doing it on your own footage, you can, adjust this a lot. You can keyframe it to make it a lot better. But yeah, that's all we're going to do in this video. If you've made it this far, good job. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful in some way. And like I said last time, knowing these technical details like the math function that gamma represents or the difference between softness and preblur isn't necessary to use the chroma key effect, but I think it's still useful to know what's actually going on just so you can pull the best key possible. So next time I'm going to be going over the retain mask and remove mask settings. I will try to get that video out as soon as possible. I know last time I said that and it took like 8 months. Sorry, I had school. But I'm actually going to try to upload a lot more regularly now, maybe at least 1 or 2 videos a month, so stay tuned. And yeah, okay, alright, I'll see you in the next part.